Thank you very much indeed. A very good evening to you. Our top stories: around 10 people have been killed after a shooting at an adult education centre in Sweden, described by the Prime Minister as the worst in the country's history. A warning viewers may find the following footage distressing.
Utan jacka. Alltså jag går ut henne nu. Oh my god, det var skjutning. Folk gråter. Oh my god, det är skjutning!
It took place at campus Risbergska in the central city of Örebro, attended by students aged 20 and above. This footage shows students hiding under desks while the attack took place. Police believe the male perpetrator is amongst the dead. His identity or age is not known, or indeed any potential motive, although police say they don't believe there is a terror motive. The Prime Minister of the country, Ulf Kristersson, says it's a painful day for the country. The family of a teenager who was stabbed to death at a school in Sheffield have paid tribute to their beautiful boy. Harvey Wilgoose died after the attack at All Saints Catholic School yesterday. His family say they're utterly heartbroken. Their lives will never be the same again. Harvey's mother, Caroline, and other family members visited the school earlier, where flowers, balloons and cards have been left for the popular pupil. A 15-year-old boy arrested on suspicion of murder remains in custody. A panel of international medical experts has concluded Lucy Letby did not murder any babies after outlining significant new evidence. They believe bad medical care and natural causes led to the deaths. Letby serving 15 whole life sentences after being convicted of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 others in 2015 and 16. The case is to be reviewed by a commission that investigates potential miscarriages of justice. Chair of the panel, Dr. Xu Li, says there are alternative explanations for each of her convictions.
We did not find any murders. In all cases, death or injury were due to natural causes or just bad medical care. In our opinion, the medical evidence doesn't support murder in any of these babies, just natural causes and bad medical care.
The President of Poland says the EU is ready and will respond to any US tariffs within an hour. Donald Tusk, former head of the European Council, says the EU will act together in the face of tariffs announced by Donald Trump. It's emerged Trump will speak with the Chinese President Xi Jinping later, after China announced retaliatory tariffs on American goods following his 10% tax on its imports. His threats of tariffs against Canada and Mexico were paused for 30 days yesterday after 11th-hour negotiations. And the Princess of Wales has joined a group of children on a visit to the National Portrait Gallery as part of her gradual return to public engagements following cancer treatment. Kate took the school bus to the popular arts attraction. The 13 children there were taken on the magical Bowbeam Tree Trail, based on the new Shaping Us framework published by Kate's Royal Foundation Centre for Early Childhood. It's aimed at increasing awareness and understanding of society's social and emotional skills. And those are the latest GB News headlines. I'll be back with more in an hour's time.
So the EU reset, I guess it really began last night. Keir Starmer heads off to Brussels for dinner with the other European leaders. The choice of location was fascinating. Palais d'Egmont, which is where they never have dinners there. They nearly always have them in the council building. Why did they choose that building? Well, there was symbolism here, because that is where Edward Heath went to sign the accession treaty in 1972. I think that was a bit of a game and an attempt to ever so slightly humiliate the British Prime Minister. We got a raft of conclusions, one of which was that we're going to deepen industrial collaboration. We're clearly going to get closer to EU rules. We may even allow the ECJ some oversight. But a lot of what was discussed last night will become clearer at a summit that's going to happen in this country in the middle of May. I guess that Sir Keir really is a rejoiner at heart. And I fear that we're going to sort of head a little bit closer towards that Brexit in name only. As long as he doesn't get too close, because if he does, it'll reduce our ability to be flexible with America. I'm joined in the studio by Sir David Davis MP. I'm joined by Sir Ranil Jayawardena and just ordinary Joe Phillips. I'm very sorry about that. David, you were heavily involved in the Brexit negotiations for many years. What's going on?
Well, firstly, there's a degree of Labour naivety about this. They think of Europe as a good thing. They're all intrinsically Remainers. There are a couple of honourable exceptions, but the vast majority are intrinsically Remainers. They'd love to be back in. And so they're going to be fairly weak willpower, shall we say, in this exercise. They'll get pressed. They'll get pressed on fishing rights.
Yep.
They'll get pressed on free movement, or at least free movement for young people, which will grow. They'll get pressed on the European Court of Justice because we'll get sucked in, and so then there's only one thing that can arbitrate this.
Well, one could argue, David, that if the Conservatives had actually taken us away from more EU law, it would be much more difficult to get close again.
Not really. I mean, look, I think what will happen is they'll come back, and you talk about this European integration, industrial integration.
Yeah, collaboration.
Collaboration.
So is that an industrial policy?
It will be integration.
Is that a procurement policy? What is it?
Well, one of the things will be a procurement policy. We will get sucked into, because some of this is about defence, we'll get sucked into defence procurement rules. Yeah. You watch, you know. Yeah. And so our own companies will be at risk.
So Kinetic and all the big providers are going to be watching this very carefully.
Yeah, I would think so. And their shareholders, I would watch their share.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. I mean, the Liberal Democrats are, every PMQs, we must rejoin the customs union. So I guess you're thrilled by this. You barely conceal your excitement.
Well, that's always the case. Really.
That's why we have you on.
No, thank you. No, I don't think there is any chance of rejoining, much as I wish we had never left. But, I think that battle has been won. I have yet, and maybe one of you could tell me, one advantage to anybody from Brexit. Because whatever you think, it was so badly run and so badly managed that any benefits that might have come have yet to appear on the horizon.
Well, I think foreign policy, we've stood taller, the AUKUS deal, what we've done on Ukraine, I mean, that's just a start.
Well, Ukraine, yes, to be fair to Boris Johnson, he was at the forefront of
the fact that if Trump puts tariffs on the European Union, we're free to be outside of it.
But all the more...
how many examples do you want?
But, Nigel, come on, it is ridiculous.
And that's what you get from a poorly run Brexit.
But the burden on small businesses, the burden on farmers, the lack of professional qualification lining up with people, the ability to travel, it's just ridiculous.
The burden is interesting, Ranil, because, one of the things that we all believed, and certainly of the 5.5 million men and women running small businesses who overwhelmingly voted Brexit, they thought the rule book would get simpler. There's evidence that actually the rule book barely changed. And that actually our own quangos and regulatory authorities have made people's lives even more miserable.
Well, look, I want to come back on something that Joe said, but in answer to your question, yes, there is further to go in terms of simplifying regulation. Yes, we could have done that.
We've barely started.
I agree with that.
It's 5 years on.
In one bit of defence, I think it is clear that COVID did come at the worst possible time in regards to
just
getting
because
that
we got
done.
COVID.
Hang on.
Some people working did it. I mean,
But I think there's a bigger point here, which is the opportunities that we have seized already. And trade is a huge one, which you mentioned. Not only the ability to trade more easily with the US if we secure a deal, and half that deal's on the shelf already, I know, because it was there when I was working on it. Not only because the EU will be hit by tariffs from the US potentially in a way that we won't, but also because we've been able to join new trading areas around the world. The CPTPP, a trading area of $9 trillion.
The Pacific.
The Pacific.
We've got more flexibility.
These are the things that are the wins for our small businesses right now.
With the pan-European Mediterranean?
Hang on. And it's an opportunity to make sure there's diagonal accumulation, which means that you can have a supply chain that involves these fast-growing parts of the world. The really important thing is we don't get sucked into deals with Europe that fit our ability to do deals with others. And so if we want to have a closer deal with Canada, if we want to have a closer deal with the United States,
given that you accept we've left, that is a fair point, isn't it?
Yes, up to a point, Lord Copper. But the other thing that David touched on briefly, and I think is the biggest issue, is defence and security. And we know, and you know better than us, Nigel, that Donald Trump does not and will not support Europe or NATO if the war
He,
in Ukraine
on this
becomes closer.
programme, said last year, we will 100% fulfil our NATO commitments, provided everybody pays 2%.
Yeah.
Couldn't be clearer. Right, I'm going to move on.
that
I'm
was
going to move
before,
on.
Elon
We will
Musk
come
got
back to
involved.
Europe in weeks to come, don't worry. I promise you we will, particularly when this wretched summit happens.
I've got a season ticket.
Now, the Lucy Letby case, you remember all of the headlines. She was convicted of killing 7 babies and attempting to murder 8 more. The headlines were completely extraordinary, biggest mass baby killer in British history. And much of the evidence that was used by a doctor who talked about how you could inject air into the... I mean, I don't want to go into the details, they're too horrible, but you know where I'm going with this. And yet, the evidence that doctor was used was held up today, and let's just listen to what he has to say, as actually being used wrongly.
In summary, ladies and gentlemen, we did not find any murders. In all cases, death or injury were due to natural causes or just bad medical care. Lucy was charged with 7 murders and 7 attempted murders. In our opinion, the medical evidence doesn't support murder in any of these babies, just natural causes and bad medical care.
Well, that was Dr. Xu Li. So a couple of months ago, this chap called David Davis came up to me in the Commons and said he was really, really unhappy with the Lucy Letby case. He was going to fight it. And I thought, well, it's just one of the usual David Davis eccentricities. But David, you are a great champion of these cases, and you fought many of them over the years. What happens next? Because what was said today was very powerful.
Well, I think what your audience should understand is Dr. Xu Li, himself a world-class neonatologist, still practicing, still working, put together this group of 14, I think it was, of the top specialists in the world. They poured through all of the case notes for the Lucy Letby trial, of which there are hundreds and hundreds of pages, and
14 experts,
14 experts, and deduced what actually happened. They actually did the job that should have been done in the trial and wasn't done in the trial.
Which begs the question, why?
Well, this goes back to how we recruit expert witnesses. What happens is each side recruits its own expert witness, and then you have a sort of battle of experts. In this particular case, the defence didn't put up their expert, which didn't help what they call equality of arms, which is a bad way of doing things. I mean, in 2011, the Law Commission said we should do it a different way, and we've done nothing about it since. And what you got is an expert who basically was arguing the police case. You know, he was finding reasons to argue the police case. That's how we got to the injection of air, either into veins or into the stomach.
And this narrative, of course, suited the hospital. To say, not Chester, not our fault, Gov.
Yeah, because what came out of the Xu Li inquiry was there were a number of cases where quite significant mistakes were made. Now, we don't know today that the babies would necessarily survive without the mistakes, but it didn't improve the odds. Indeed, it dramatically worsened the odds. So, of course, it suits the hospital. The hospital's already been criticised by the Royal College before the criminal case took place, but it suits the hospital, or at least it suits some of the doctors and the medical hierarchy in hospital to have somebody take the blame. A scapegoat.
So the Criminal Cases Review Commission is next, yeah?
That's next, and even today on one of the lunchtime media, Ken MacDonald, the ex-DPP, who had been very critical of our arguments to date, said, actually, this looks compelling. You know, the system has to accommodate this.
David, what really worries me about this, you know, we kind of think, well, since Magna Carta, we've developed the balance between the power of the state and the individual, perhaps better here than in almost any other country in the world over centuries.
It is, despite all this, yeah.
And yet there seemed to be, we had the Andrew Malnikoff case, 17 years in prison for rape. A story this week that a killer from Birkenhead, the Beast of Birkenhead, after 38 years may be released. There seem to be too many miscarriages of justice.
Yeah, there are, since the 70s, when we kept records, as it were, there have been 500. You know.
Wow.
You know?
That is shocking.
Just looking at this, I mean, and it's not for us to judge.
No.
But this does, I mean, I have to say, I accepted all the headlines when I read them originally. It does make you think again, doesn't it, Jane?
I think, first of all, it must be so horrible for the parents. And I think it's really important. And I'm sure David is...
Because it's just going on and on.
Yes, I mean, you know, they thought they had got some sort of end to it. And obviously this is now throwing up a whole load of things. I mean, it begs so many questions. And I'm afraid that throughout the trial, the hospital came out of it very badly, ignoring things. And it sounds as though Lucy Letby may well be a scapegoat. But the other thing it says, Nigel, as you and I were talking outside, you know, never think about capital punishment, because 500 miscarriages of justice.
Yeah, I have to say I'm with you on that. I think I'm quite shocked that it's 500
That's
cases. I mean,
astonishing.
Ranald, it's quite worrying, really, isn't it?
Yes, and it also says that we need to have better remedies in place where things might be found to be wrong. Look, I'm not qualified to judge in this case. Clearly, these are people who are experts bringing certain views to the fore. But the Criminal Cases Review Commission has been, sadly, historically very slow at reviewing cases. I know from the Post Office cases that they were reviewing. My predecessor, James Arbuthnot, led that charge. It had to go through the CCRC once people had been...
And he did it very, very well.
Indeed. But fundamentally, Parliament, the courts could not intervene until the CCRC had looked at it. And so we've got to make sure that those sorts of bodies are properly empowered.
15 years. Malikoff was 13 years care of the CCRC after they had DNA evidence. That was an amazing thing.
So that body, I think, has got to be reformed, turbocharged, so that where things go wrong,
on this, because we made such a noise, they've already set up a team to look at when this data is all collated later this month. They will get that and get on with it straight away.
David, whatever happens in the end of this, great campaigning work for you, and this will be the conversation around many dinner tables tonight. Thank you for coming in.
My pleasure.
And joining us. In a moment, we'll talk about Angela Rayner and the establishment of a new Islamophobia council. But surely, shouldn't we be treating all religions exactly the same?
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
That's football.
Well,
you know, it's the hope that kills you.
It does. It gives you highs, it gives you lows. I mean, if you're an Everton fan at the moment, you probably had far too many lows. But as you know, I'm a Nottingham Forest fan.
Well, you must be having a huge high.
But, you know, you had one of the greatest footballers ever to grace the game, Mike, and that was Dixie Dean.
Yeah, absolutely. William Ralph Dean. Didn't like being called Dixie, but that was his nickname. And he was born in 1907. He was my grandfather's best mate. I'm an Everton shareholder. I've been, you know, attached to the club all my life, and so was my father, so was my grandfather, our greatest ever player.
So back in the day when players like Dixie Dean were playing football for big crowds in, you know, a proper...
72,000.
Yeah, a proper working class sport back in the day, weren't it, football? Not like it is today. You've got to be pretty wealthy to afford a ticket.
Even in the 70s, right, and I've seen some, you know, I do like looking back on the football that I watched as a kid. Even in the 70s now, I've seen pictures of the turnstiles, as we used to call them, with a sign at the top, 5 shillings for the Eastern Terrace. 5 shillings. Yeah. Last time I turned down a ticket to go to a football match was Arsenal, who wanted me to pay £830 for a seat in an executive lounge. And though I could have afforded it, because I've worked all my life like you, I just thought at that point, that's ridiculous.
Well,
you know?
you should have told him you were Keir Starmer's security man. You'd have probably got him for nothing.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea. Yeah.
But you know, you go back to the the 1930s and 1940s, even the 1960s and 70s. You know, the footballers would walk to the ground and play a game, and then walk back and go for a few beers in the pub.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
It's a surprise. exist.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Well, some of your thoughts at home on the Lucy Letby case. One viewer says, what about the self-incriminating evidence of Letby's note she made saying she was guilty? Yes, I remember all of that, and that's all going to come out in the Criminal Cases Review Commission. And Dee says, I just find it hard to believe that the amount of babies that died were natural causes. Well, I can't comment on that. I'm not a statistician. Another viewer says the justice system needs work if it's that easily mistaken and careless. It's not fit for purpose and its judgments cannot be trusted. Well, look, David Davis has dedicated years of his career to these sort of campaigns. And if he tells me there have been 500 serious miscarriages of justice over the last few decades, I'm sure he is right. Now, Islamophobia. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, is going to create a council on Islamophobia. It'll be 16 people strong. One of the shortlisted candidates is a guy called Qari Azim, a Leeds imam who was dismissed by the Tories in 2022 after backing calls for a ban on the film The Lady of Heaven about the Prophet Muhammad's daughter, which I would suggest is not a particularly encouraging start, Ranald, to an Islamophobia council. And the reason I say that, and you might think I'm being deeply sceptical, but the reason I'm saying that is 4 Gaza independents were elected in the election. You had Wes Streeting crept back in by 500 votes. You had Jess Phillips creep back in by 1,500 votes. And in those inner town, inner city communities, particularly the Pakistani ones, there are a lot of 14, 15, 16 and 17-year-olds who'll be voting at the next election.
Yeah.
Some of whom, 25% of them or so, have been quite radicalised in recent times. This is all politics, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's politics, and it's also, I think, an element of creating a two-tier Britain by default. I actually don't think that's necessarily their intention, but that's what's going to happen. We're creating blasphemy laws.
Or it gets seen like that.
Indeed. We're creating blasphemy laws, in effect, potentially, to protect one religion. I'm a practicing Christian. I am not calling for blasphemy laws to protect the Church of England or the Christian faith in its entirety.
Let alone the Archbishop of Canterbury.
And no longer in his office. But I think the point here is that there's a real perception that some people are going to be treated and protected differently from everyone else. And that's not the way we do things in Britain, and that would be deeply concerning. I also suspect it will lead a lot of people who voted Labour this time, perhaps lending their vote to Labour for the first time, think again and say, hang on, that's not what we voted for.
It's interesting, Joe, isn't it? I mean, the perception, and you can say it's real or otherwise, but the perception of two-tier Britain has established itself quite firmly.
Well, only because...
Over the course, just give you one example. So people that said or did horrid things in the wake of the Southport killings finished up in prison very, very quickly. And yet the Manchester airport attackers, it took months, 5 months, for any charges to be brought. And Ranald's point on this is if we single out one particular religion and say, you know, we must be careful what we say about them, almost, not quite blasphemy laws, but nearly, that could lead to a lot of discontent.
It could do if that is the aim of the Commission, which it isn't, and you know it isn't, Nigel. It is a commission to look at all sorts of things. You mentioned one person whose name is in the frame. The other one is Dominic Grieve, former Attorney General, who actually wrote the report in 2016, I think it was, which was adopted by the previous government and then adopted by Labour. It isn't just about Islamophobia, it's about a whole range of things.
But if we're being fair, I mean, surely we would establish not just this, but we'd establish an inquiry into anti-Semitism, which has clearly grown enormously in this country.
Well, I think that's one of the things suggested.
Or do we just do what Ranald said and say all religions are the same? There's no need to single anyone out in particular.
Just to go back to I'm not even sure if you were in Parliament in 2016. Louise Casey, who seems to be the go-to person for reports, did a report for the government on community cohesion, and she came up with a whole load of recommendations, including people learning English within a year of being here, all sorts of things which would have supported and enabled a greater integration. And none of that was adopted by the Conservative government. So, actually, you know, you do have something to answer to.
Well, hang on. You don't have to accept everything that inquiry or indeed a report author might have put forward. But, you know, I think you've got to take decisions based on the situation as you find them. And one thing I would say, in fairness to what the Labour Party is doing now, is bringing together Sajid Javid and John Denham, who I think are both very credible figures, to look at the aftermath of the riots and the sort of widespread unrest that there was. I think that is a much more helpful approach than trying to come up with these laws that create a de facto blasphemy law.
But I agree with you, and I think, you know, that is a very good pairing. John Denham, who I used to work with at the Home Office.
And how long will it take? Because the argument against the argument against a national grooming gangs inquiry from the Prime Minister is it would take 7 years. I trust Southport's not going to take 7 years.
So I think they want to come back by the end of the year.
They've got to do these things more quickly. And
so why couldn't they do grooming gangs more quickly?
Well, this isn't a public inquiry.
No.
This isn't a public inquiry. So this is the two of them and others.
And it hasn't got, and does it have the right to make...
No,
it doesn't.
No.
So it's got no statutory powers.
No.
So is there any point in having commissions or inquiries if they haven't got statutory powers? Because in America, you love or hate the American system, but when they have a big committee hearing, they have real powers.
But there's a big difference there, because it's their House of Representatives, it's their Congress who run those inquiries.
Yeah, well, why don't we do that?
Well, I think there's merit.
That's what I'm saying.
There's merit in what you're saying, but the Inquiries Act that we currently have, which both parties, in fairness, have followed since 2005, says
they're
it's judge-led.
They're generally white.
Well, they're judge-led, and the lawyers are the ones that benefit. And I think there is merit, like the Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards under the last Conservative government that got to the nub of the problem in the city. I think there is merit in having parliamentarians looking at the big issues of the day.
I think there's something to be said, even if it doesn't have the statutory weight, if you like, of a public inquiry, to do something quick while it's fresh in people's mind. I mean, the number of public inquiries that have been held and how much it has cost.
Yes, and the time it's taken.
I mean, there's one opened only this month into the Omar bombing. I mean, that is a quarter of a century ago.
Let's go down the American route. Let's make our politicians earn their living.
We've got select committees, Nigel, which are very powerful, but they don't.
But they're not really powerful, are they? Because they're only powerful. But they're only powerful, Joe, if people agree to go.
No, that's not true. So, no, select committees have the ability to summon people to Parliament, other than other members of Parliament. That's one caveat.
And if they refuse?
There is sanction, but it hasn't been used.
It's never been used.
It hasn't been used for, our lifetime. But there is a sanction, and we should restore that. I agree with that entirely.
There we are. We'll end that segment with some degree of agreement. In a moment, I do not know what on earth is going on over the Rosebank field in the North Sea. 1 minute, a court seems to think it's illegal. Next minute, the government indicates they might go ahead with it. I'm confused. Let's try and get to the bottom of it in just a moment.
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hi there. If you're looking for some winter sun, actually the Mediterranean's the place to find it. Plenty of sunny skies during the next few days, although Greece has seen some heavy rain, and that's clearing on Wednesday, followed by windy conditions through Wednesday, Thursday into Friday. Italy through the Balearics into Spain, Portugal and the Canaries, indeed plenty of sunny skies, and it remains that way until the end of the week, when it does turn increasingly unsettled.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Most of us have a couple of sunny days to look forward to, but it is going to be a bit colder than it was today. That's thanks to a cold front which has been pushing across the country. It's also bringing many of us a spell of rain. It started off pretty wet in the west, and through this evening that rain working its way across East Anglia and the southeast, but clearing away by midnight. Showers following on behind into western Scotland, some snow on the hills here, a few showers drifting through Northern Ireland overnight, but for many a dry night, lengthy clear spells, and a bit colder than last night. 2 or 3 degrees in most towns and cities, but there will be some pockets of frost in the countryside. So yeah, a chilly start to Wednesday, but nothing unusual for February, and generally a sunny start too, certainly across much of eastern Scotland. Plenty of sunshine on offer. Further west, there'll be sunny spells, but there will be showers moving in on a fairly brisk breeze, and some of those showers falling as snow over the hills. 1 or 2 showers will drift in across Northern Ireland through the day. May see the odd one still for northwest England, West Wales, southwest England too, but most of England and Wales starting fine and dry and with plenty of sunshine, and actually not a great deal of change as we go through the day. Some cloud will bubble up. There is the small chance of the odd shower across western parts. Certainly showers will keep going in western Scotland, but for the vast majority, dry and bright, lighter winds than today. It will be a cooler, fresher feel, but these temperatures in the afternoon pretty much spot on the average for the early part of February. Those temperatures will drop down pretty sharply on Wednesday night. More widespread frost on Thursday morning. Could be some fog around too on Thursday morning, particularly across these eastern areas, but generally it's another fine day. Not as many showers in the northwest. Most places dry and fine with sunny spells. Notice though a bit of an easterly wind picking up across the south. That will introduce more cloud on Friday and a colder feel for all of us heading into the weekend.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So, can we develop our oil and gas fields or can't we? There's been a huge debate going on for years about this. Very big taxes put on companies that want to extract from the North Sea. And there was even a case where drilling in Surrey was potentially going to go ahead, and yet there was a case that was taken that overturned it and said, no, you can't do this without considering the downstream effects of what this might mean for climate change. The last week over Rosebank, which is potentially a very, very big oil field, have been bewildering. 1 minute, a court says, no, you can't. The next minute, a minister says, yes, you can. The will of Parliament ultimately is what counts with an elected majority. And the Supreme Court's been involved over the course of the years. And I'm utterly bewildered by quite where we stand. There are many who say we're now run more by lawyers than politicians. I don't know. Paul Posland is a regular on this panel, barrister, Lawyers for Nature, so he's a climate activist. We understand that. We love seeing you here. But legally, what is actually going on here?
I'll try and make it as simple as I can.
Please. Because I must confess, I'm quite bewildered by this.
Yeah, it's not the easiest area of law to understand, but in simple terms, Parliament has passed a number of regulations, both for planning, for developments of oil on land, like in Surrey with the Finch case, and also for offshore, saying that the climate carbon impact of that must be taken into account. Now, before the case of Finch, it was interpreted to mean only the climate impact of extracting the oil, so the trucks going to and from site and that kind of thing. And then in the case of Finch last year, the Supreme Court decided that actually it should include the downstream emissions.
On what basis did they decide that?
Well, because
I mean, is it them making up the law?
No, because that is the carbon impact, isn't it? It's from a common sense point of view, Nigel. It is ridiculous to say.
I'm going to stop you a moment because I do have sitting next to me the former Environment Secretary. A judge may have an opinion.
Yeah.
But it's as if they're making up the law as they're going along.
Well, fundamentally, that is what is happening, in my view, and the view of many people in this country. So this is actually something you'll love. You'll love what I'm about to say. This is the European impact on our courts. Because, historically, judges made sure that what Parliament said was followed in our courts. That was the literal approach, I think it's called. And they even had a golden rule, which said that if Parliament had been unclear, then it would come up with what Parliament's intention was. But the purposive approach... But
things have changed.
That's right. The purposive approach, which is what courts now, 9 times out of 10, I'm making that stat up, but you get what I mean, adopt, which is, well, Parliament didn't say this, but we think that that's what should have happened. That's what judges are doing now. They're making the law of the land.
So, Paul, last week, we get a judgment then on Rosebank, effectively a judge saying it shouldn't go ahead.
Yeah, and that was... really the only decision that could be made after the Finch decision, because...
that's the precedent that's been set.
Yeah, the Supreme Court said it has to include the downstream Scope 3 emissions, and therefore, actually, in the Rosebank case, all parties, including the oil companies, agreed that the decision was unlawful. So they agreed that the law said that the decision was unlawful. The key question was whether it could be overturned, given it had been made before.
And now Rachel Reeves has indicated, because she's now desperate for growth, and she wants to build things and do things, and she's now saying she may go ahead, and that may split the cabinet, but who's in charge here?
Well, I think it's quite clear who's in charge. Parliament made a law, the courts interpreted it, and now it goes back into the political arena.
Right.
And that is where the decision is going to be made. But I think there's a key thing here. The decision needs to be made in the political arena according to common sense. It's ludicrous to say that all of the carbon emissions from burning all the oil aren't taken into account. So let's have an honest debate as a country.
So if the government legislates specifically on this, the courts will go with them?
Well, we have Parliament Supreme. So, but the point is they're going to struggle doing that because many voters do care about climate change and want proper climate action.
One second.
But it's really interesting. Paul accepts there that Parliament didn't actually say that what the courts are now doing should have been the law, which proves my point, which is that the judges are making the law of the land without the consent to do so. Parliament is...
But there's always going to be a test case. I mean, that is the whole point, that the intention might be X, but the reality might be Y. I just want to ask Paul, if this Finch case is held up, is it not possible that it would be then used to stop the Heathrow third runway?
It could stop lots of things, yes. But the point is, of course, is that Parliament could, if it wanted to, overrule it. It could pass an act to Parliament tomorrow to overrule that.
But it would need to be quite specific.
Yeah, I mean, to read... Randall keeps talking about saying overruling the will of Parliament. The article in question is the environmental impact assessment shall identify, describe and assess in an appropriate manner the direct and indirect effects of a project, which includes climate. Now, I think it's very clear that the indirect effects can be from the carbon that you burn from the oil.
So that's not the project. The project, in planning terms, was the actual construction and building and the operation of a site. And this is the creep that we've seen. But I think there's a bigger issue here as well, which is that actually, right now, there is an imbalance, I think, between Parliament, government and the judiciary. And this stems from Tony Blair's era, where, I'm sorry to say, he created a Supreme Court which has never been part of our constitution. We don't have separation of powers in the way the US does.
No.
And it's imbalanced our system in a way that I think really needs to be restored. And I thought it was a very good article written by Charles Moore in The Telegraph, which set this out again. I'm delighted this issue has gone mainstream. It's really important that we redress this balance and make sure that, as you say, Paul, Parliament is in charge and is able to decide the law. But it is.
Parliament is in charge.
Yeah, well, but it doesn't feel like it because of the judgments.
But that only doesn't feel like it because it's doing something that the judges are coming up with something that you don't agree with. I mean,
it's not about whether we agree or not.
But Ronald's talking about, you must only consider what's happening right now. If you build a road...
They're interpreting the law. The judges are interpreting
the law. If they had passed the offshore oil, the snappily titled Offshore Oil and Gas Exploration, Production, Unloading and Storage (brackets Environmental Impact Assessments) close brackets Regulations 2020.
Sorry guys, this won't go on for much longer, I promise.
The entire rest of the segment just reading out the name of the regulations. If they'd have passed that stating, and this is not to include the downstream Scope 3 emissions, the judges wouldn't have come to the same conclusion. So Parliament should pass clearer laws.
Fine. We will draw stumps on that. I'll just leave you with this segment with my What the Farage moment of the day. And this involves West Yorkshire Police, who have spent around about £1 million on DEI. Yes, absolutely, it's all happening over there. Yes, £900,000 on diversity positions. Head of DEI, you can go to West Yorkshire and get this, and it's over 90 grand a year. Positive Action Ambassador for 60 grand, and what on earth they do. And when you think that West Yorkshire is one of those areas in which those appalling things happened to far too many of those young girls, it does make you wonder. I think there is a wind blowing from across the Atlantic against this nonsense. What say you, Jo?
I think it's very hard to justify those sort of salaries and those sort of posts when there are other things that need sorting out. But the other thing I would say is that actually we know perfectly well, because there have been very many reports and investigations, that the police in many cases ignore, like they did, the young white girls in Rotherham and places like that, because it's a class thing, because it's sexism, and there are big institutional problems of racism, sexism, misogyny and homophobia.
Well, so they're racist against black people, they're racist against white people, the police make mistakes.
Well, I think we've actually got to revisit the whole structure of policing in this country. You know, there's been this move towards a police service which has led to all of this stuff.
As opposed to a police force.
Yeah. People want the police to uphold and enforce the law without fear or favour. And unfortunately, the shift that has occurred over the last 20 years has been very bad.
Maybe we need a national force.
No.
Well,
maybe we need a bit of Trumpism to come across the pond to get rid of all this rubbish.
We need better police commissioners.
That is serving no purpose. In a moment, we're going to discuss electric vehicle mandates. Are they really working? The government's having a review. Maybe we need to make some very big changes, or China will take the whole car market over.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
An absolute monster. It took Chloe and Sean Ing 90 minutes to reel in this gigantic 8-foot-long monster fish from Chigborough Fisheries in Essex. And upon weighing this enormous marine beast, it was found to have been 7 pounds heavier than the existing British record, a 143-pound catfish caught also in Essex. But as I understand it, you actually went for a Chinese meal when fate struck. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So I was fishing an area of Chigborough where you have to fish at a fair distance. So I cast my rods out and then we ordered a Chinese. So I got the bite at about 10 to 8 at night. And then about 20 minutes into it, my phone started ringing, the Chinese guys at the gate with my delivery. So I had to send a couple of guys off to go and get it. And then, the fight, obviously, you can't just stop the fight to go and get your Chinese. The fight went on, for about an hour and a half in total. There's no net in the world that's big enough for this fish. So we had to send out, first of all, I sent out a mate, Alex. He went out there to go and basically use what we call a sling. So that's a safe apparatus that we use to take the fish out of the water. He then went to and he turned around and he was like, we're going to need another sling. So then we sent out another friend with a sling, and these slings are 4 foot long each. So then we had the catfish wrapped up in 2 slings, and it was still slightly longer than that. And then we got to a point where we was like, now we've got to try and get it out of the water to photo, to weigh it, because obviously we knew then that it was possibly going to be a UK record.
GB News.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Let's talk electric vehicles. No mention of Elon Musk, I absolutely promise you. Now, the government set a series of targets. Originally, if you remember, all cars that were sold after 2030 would have to be electric. That was extended out to 2035. But the part that most people don't know, because it's not been discussed, I think simply and sensibly, is that despite the fact, and I'm joined by Tim Tozer, former chairman and MD of Vauxhall Motors. Tim, despite the fact we've pushed this deadline out to 2035, actually, by 2030, there are some very, very big targets to meet, aren't there?
Very big. And, I mean, the timelines are staring us now in the face because time goes quickly. And this is a matter that's going to concern us all, touch us all, because a lot of us are drivers, we're consumers. And what it means is that at the end of 2030, I mean, you will not be able to buy a new petrol or diesel car. And then moving forward to 2035, from that date, you will only be able to buy an electric vehicle.
Yeah, so it's 80% by 2030 is the target that's been set, and 100% by 2035.
And the targets for electric vehicles as we go year by year, and we've just finished the first year of the mandate, where the percentage of any car maker's sales had to be 22% electric.
And it's 28%.
It's 28% this year.
It's not going to happen, is it?
Well, the mandate has already been acknowledged by the new government as not quite working as intended. And, I mean, frankly, that's an understatement. I mean, the pressures that are building from last year's 24% are enormous. And I think those targets came very fast and furious in reality. And the carrot and stick, which is what the mandate is all about, is heavy-handed. I mean, the fines, if you miss these numbers, are £15,000 a car.
So this is for the manufacturers?
Yes.
And is this why? I mean, Luton, a place that must have been quite close to your heart for many, many years, and we're seeing 1,100 people losing their jobs.
It's absolutely part of that. It's not the only reason. Luton was a fairly old plant. The more modern plant in Ellesmere Port is picking up the work from Luton. But actually, Stellantis did lay the claim that it was the mandate that was part of the decision. And I think that's because in any financial assessment they would have taken over the whole business they had in the UK, I mean, the run rate, the demand rate, natural demand for electric cars or vans, and they're van makers essentially, is running way off the pace.
And when Boris Johnson...
So the fines were a very real proposition.
When Boris Johnson brought all these targets in, were other countries doing the same thing?
Yes, I mean, the targets are there in the EU in particular, and, I mean, they are broadly similar to ours. The USA has some mandated standards as well, but that's all changing right now.
I think it might be. Because isn't the problem here, Tim, isn't the problem that if we stick to this, and, you know, we all know that electric vehicles are more expensive to buy.
They are.
We know the resale values have fallen very, very sharply indeed.
And the used car market hasn't formed for them yet, and that's a critical part of the used car market.
Range anxiety, I mean, depending where you live, but it's very, very real. And people are reluctant.
And nowhere to charge it.
And charging, I mean, if you live in, you know, a flat or whatever, it's very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. Very, very difficult indeed.
So and actually, if you can't charge on the drive and then get advantage of the overnight rates, you're going to be parking...
But if we stick to anything...
Sorry, you're going to be off-road charging.
And that's difficult.
It's about 9 times the price.
And very expensive, particularly on the motorways. So aren't we heading to a situation here where if we stick to anything like these limits, basically, we are just saying, China, why don't you come in and take the entirety of our car market?
I think that's the real hard-nosed point we all have to understand.
Am I exaggerating?
No, because China... over the last 10, 15 years, has strategised their move into electric vehicles with a lot of competence now in making batteries. I mean, they are the world centre for making batteries. I mean, the Nissan plant in Sunderland, which makes 500,000 cars a year, a lot of them are electric. The batteries come from a Chinese supplier located next to the plant.
So why can't we make them in this country?
Because the horse has bolted.
Supply chains.
Yes.
So you couldn't start up that industry.
Sadly, it's too late now. There was a move and an attempt with Britvolt, which failed.
Yeah.
The Norwegians have just had a battery company go under as well. So I'm afraid China's colonisation of all of the raw materials, precious metals.
They've been playing this game for a long time.
They have, and they've won.
Yeah. And that's why Trump's putting tariffs on, isn't it?
Yes.
Or part of it.
Yes. Now, we by virtue of, I suspect, the Chancellor's visit to China, might have discussed whether we would put tariffs on.
Yeah.
I mean, I find myself not arguing for tariffs generally, but where actually the support that the Chinese industry has had, state support, has been so massive, 9 times anything that has been given to any European supplier, it's unfair.
Quite a compelling argument Tim's making.
Yes, absolutely. And it's the sort of thing that we now have our own independent trade remedies authority. It's the sort of thing that they could look at, because if there is unfair government support behind certain industries, like there was for steel, it is possible for the government to intervene and put tariffs on specific products from specific countries, and that's entirely within the rules of world trade.
Well, my instincts are that this sounds like, I'm afraid it's got Boris Johnson's fingerprints all over it. Great idea, but absolutely no planning to join it.
But you'd want even more easy. You'd want everyone to be out their car on public transport. No, you want no one to drive anywhere.
She's not quite agreeing.
No, but I mean, I know I'm right, aren't I, Martin? It's the lack of joined-up thinking about how are people going to get access to chargers, how are they going to afford them.
Well, the EU were just as guilty from the sounds of it.
Well, maybe they were, but, you know, where's the incentive for anybody to buy one?
Well, that's the key point, because natural demand from private customers in particular. I mean, if you have your own business, you'd be mad not to have an electric vehicle, because you can...
The tax breaks.
Yes. Absolutely, the tax breaks are enormous. Yeah. But private individuals are not flocking to buy them because they are expensive. Insurance is expensive. The charging issue may or may not be an issue for them. And it just hasn't come naturally. In fact, last year, of all of the private buyers who bought new cars, only 10% bought electric cars. So 1 in 10...
You've got to drive it, haven't you?
So there has to be some support. And that is what the Motor Manufacturers and Traders Organisation is asking for. I think the question now is, I mean, Jonathan Ashcroft has said the mandate isn't quite working as intended. I mean, he's really got to be brave at changing.
This review is going on as we speak.
But if it's just tinkering around the edges, that won't be good enough.
And our car manufacturing, meanwhile, is plummeting.
Manufacturing is plummeting. I mean, the astonishing statistic is last year we made as many cars as we did in 1954. Wow. That was when the original Mini was only on the drawing board. I mean, it's shocking. And so the industry is on the back foot, and that means jobs are at risk.
Yeah. What would you urge the government to do?
They've got to do a dramatic change in terms of, A, the fines, which are just quite ludicrous at £15,000, and they've got to slow the gradient as to the take-up of electric vehicles. I mean, to get to the 28% this year would mean a doubling of sales relative to last year. That is just not going to happen.
And presumably once you get a second-hand car market going, then it changes the dynamic. And we haven't got to that yet.
Although quite where all the electricity is going to come from is another debate for another day.
I'll sit on the side for that debate.
Please don't tell me it's wind turbines. Tim Tozer, thank you.
Great pleasure.
For coming in and explaining something in a very straightforward way to our audience. It's very, very important. Now, coming up next is State of the Nation with Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, what have you got coming up today?
Well, I've got this very interesting opinion poll, so I'm going to be talking about you very radically, but I've got an exclusive interview with Elon Musk's favourite Reform MP. Rupert Lowe is coming on, so we can talk about what is happening in the opinion polls. Are you the Roy Jenkins Donos Jaw, who is genuinely breaking the mould of British politics, or will it be much as it was in the early 1980s? So that's what we're talking about.
Jacob, very good indeed. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining me this evening. I'll be back with you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, and we'll discuss the issues of the day. We've rattled through a pretty wide range of subjects this evening, and I bet of all the stories we've talked about, I bet the one you'll be talking about in a minute is Lucy Letby, because those headlines seem so convincing. 99% of us believe that she was guilty. we're having a rethink. Let's get the weather with Alex Deacon.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Most of us have a couple of sunny days to look forward to, but it is going to be a bit colder than it was today. That's thanks to a cold front which has been pushing across the country. It's also bringing many of us a spell of rain. It started off pretty wet in the west, and through this evening that rain working its way across East Anglia and the southeast, but clearing away by midnight. Showers following on behind into western Scotland, some snow on the hills here, a few showers drifting through Northern Ireland overnight, but for many a dry night, lengthy clear spells, and a bit colder than last night, 2 or 3 degrees in most towns and cities, but there will be some pockets of frost in the countryside. So yeah, a chilly start to Wednesday, but nothing unusual for February, and generally a sunny start too, certainly across much of eastern Scotland. Plenty of sunshine on offer. Further west, there'll be sunny spells, but there will be showers moving in on a fairly brisk breeze, and some of those showers falling as snow over the hills. 1 or 2 showers will drift in across Northern Ireland through the day. May see the odd one still for northwest England, West Wales, southwest England too, but most of England and Wales starting fine and dry and with plenty of sunshine, and actually not a great deal of change as we go through the day. Some cloud will bubble up. There is the small chance of the odd shower across western parts. Certainly showers will keep going in western Scotland, but for the vast majority, dry and bright, lighter winds than today. It will be a cooler, fresher feel, but these temperatures in the afternoon pretty much spot on the average for the early part of February. Those temperatures will drop down pretty sharply on Wednesday night. More widespread frost on Thursday morning. Could be some fog around too on Thursday morning, particularly across these eastern areas, but generally it's another fine day. Not as many showers in the northwest. Most places dry and fine with sunny spells. Notice though a bit of an easterly wind picking up across the south. That will introduce more cloud on Friday and a colder feel for all of us heading into the weekend.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're giving you not 1, but 2 chances to win this month, with 2 prize bundles that include an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash. But that's not all. You'll also get a brand new iPhone 16 and a £500 shopping voucher to spend at your favourite store. So why not be extra lucky this month? For a chance to win an iPhone, vouchers and £10,000 in cash, text cash to 63232. 1 entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it? Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Reform UK has come top of a national opinion poll overtaking the Labour Party. I'll be renewing